In the pre-dawn hours of the 19th of August, 1942, on airfields in southern England, 74 squadrons began their takeoff. The pilots were British, Canadian, Polish, American, French, Norwegian, New Zealand, and Czechoslovakia, flying into the mightiest single day of fighter battle in World War II. Their mission, air cover for a vast assembly of Army and naval forces already heading across the English Channel. An armada of 237 vessels, carrying over 6,000 troops and 50 tanks, in the first amphibious assault launched since World War I. With an escort of 8 destroyers, the objective was to capture and hold for 12 hours the German-occupied port of Dieppe. It was a French resort on the Normandy coast, about 110 kilometers from England, just within range of British fighter planes. The conquering Normans sailed out of this harbor in 1066. Some of the earliest French settlers in Canada grew up in and around Dieppe. In front of the town, the Channel surf breaks along 2 kilometers of open, stony beach. Dieppe is still a popular place. It was once called the poor man's Monte Carlo. At this end of the promenade, there used to be a large casino. This has always been a pleasant Channel port. Holiday hotels still line the promenade. They offer an unobstructed view of anyone on the beach. This honeymoon haven, this Normandy playground, became the central target of an ill-fated raid where thousands would die in the killing sniper fire from the buildings and the devastating crossfire from the cliffs. Just to the west, there is a smaller resort town, Pourville. Its holiday hotels front a shorter beach, right around the corner from Dieppe, with a seawall to protect the promenade, and headlands to the east and west, commanding any approach from the water. This beach of weathered chunks of flint was another target in the massive reconnaissance in force on that summer morning in 1942. On the other side of Dieppe, WWII, a tiny resort with a beach overshadowed by the bulk of towering cliffs. It had the deadliest defenses of them all, including this bunker on the east headland. There would be no escape from its lethal fire. Stalin and Roosevelt were calling for a second front, and military leaders felt they must test Hitler's defenses just across the channel. It was decided to launch a massive amphibious assault at a channel port. The original idea was conceived by combined operations under young Lord Louis Mountbatten.
When I first discussed the outline plan which I had prepared for Dieppe with the Chiefs of Staff, I proposed to use commandos and the Royal Marine Division, all of whom were battle-trained and experienced men. To my surprise and consternation, I was then told that a political decision had been made on the highest level to use Canadian troops who've been kicking their heels about in England and wanted to get into action. The 2nd Canadian Division was chosen, an admirable division of excellent, well-trained men. Not any of them had any battle experience. I complained, I said, this is rather like teaching people to swim by throwing them in at the deep end of the swimming pool.
5,000 untried troops. For 2/3 of those who landed, the war ended right here, in an action someone had said would be a piece of cake. Was it the 2nd Division's commander, Major General John Roberts?
Well, I deny ever using that expression at all.
General Roberts gave us a general briefing and told us for the first time where we were going. And at that time, as he outlined the thing, he said, I think this is going to be a piece of cake.
They had trained hard to be soldiers, but it hadn't dawned on them yet just what it meant to go to war.
They were getting tired, you know, doing the same thing every day and not seeing any action, you know. A lot of them were getting depressed and might as well go home. He says, we're not going to see no action. Anyway, that's what the main subject was, you know, they want to see action.
There was to be action at last. A raid on July the 8th, 1942. Codename Rutter. Target Dieppe. Simulated landings were rehearsed on sandy English beaches. The latest in tank landing craft and the new Churchill tanks were to take part. There were 2 dress rehearsals in June. They did not go well. And then, at the last minute, the weather let them down. Operation Rutter was called off. All this time, German forces remained on the alert, secure behind the heavy defenses at their channel ports, including Dieppe and its neighboring towns. Herbert Tietzmann, a Wehrmacht lieutenant, was there.
Die ganze Zeit war schon sehr nervös. Wir waren in Alarmstimmung.
We were always on the alert.
Nur angezogen.
The watch was always ready.
Die Waffen mussten immer bereit sein. Trotzdem.
Nevertheless, the 18th was such a beautiful day. The sun was bright, the sea was calm.
Das Meer war spiegelglatt.
My commander, Captain Ulrich, said to me, we should go for a swim.
On that same day, August the 18th, back in England, the 2nd Division set out on what they thought was yet another exercise.
Since we all thought it was just an ordinary exercise, we carried right on in the normal way without weapons and so on, because everyone said, well, another exercise again.
The men didn't know it, but political pressure had revived the raid, now codenamed Jubilee.
We landed at New Haven and discovered from my commanding officer that this was it. We were going into Dieppe, and it so happened that in the group that I had with me, I had at least 5 or 6 people who had not been trained in the original training for the Dieppe Raid.
General Roberts would direct operations from the destroyer HMS Calpe. A young naval officer kept a detailed diary. He was aboard the command ship on the eve of battle, Lieutenant Coss Bilson.
Among the senior officers now was General Roberts, the Air Commodore in charge. And I was a little surprised, I think, as a rather serious young officer,
that they were hilarious and drinking whiskies when I felt they should perhaps be studying their charts or reading their operation orders. There were a lot of blue jokes, which I didn't find particularly funny. The one that I remember was that the Air Commodore had a wager with the General that before the night was out, before the operation was out, some Canadian soldiers would come back with a dose of French syphilis.
Well, I thought, of course, that some of them would not come back, you know, the young lads, 18, 19, 20, smiling faces, full of vigor and vitality, and, you know, and they might be dead by the next morning. I felt sad for them, and I prayed God that most of them would come back.
Under normal circumstances, when you go into an attack, you're supposed to have an operation order, and either verbal or written. But my commanding officer came to me and he told me, this is it, we're going into Dieppe. You know the planning, we had planned for it before. Do you remember the code words and the frequencies? And I said, yes, sir. He says, okay, brief your men.
Beautiful night, high, clear sky, starlit. Very beautiful, mild, no trouble about keeping warm. In fact, I tried to go to sleep on a top of a flag deck, on the flag deck. It was peaceful for 2 or 3 hours. I remember that I wrote it was as uneventful as some little watches.
I rolled over on my back and looked at the sky. It was a beautiful day. The situation was such, it became obvious that many of us were going to die.
The South Saskatchewans, the SSR, were the first Canadians to land at 0450 here at Courville. They were to occupy the town and make way for Winnipeg's Cameron Highlanders, due half an hour later. The Camerons were to sweep inland to rendezvous with the Calgary tank, while the SSR headed for a radar station and for the guns trained on the main beach at Dieppe. A Canadian correspondent landed in that early morning gloom known as nautical twilight, Wallace Rayburn.
I was with the South Saskatchewans, and the farmers there were sharpening their bayonets, you see, and everything. It was great. You know, they were so excited getting into action. They were joking. For instance, when we were running up the beach, one of the fellows turned to me and said, if there are a couple of lovers having a bit of fun and games on the beach here, he said, they're going to get one hell of a surprise when we arrive. I mean, it was that sort of attitude. It was they were excited about getting into war.
The Prairie Boys jumped out of their landing craft and dashed across this rocky shingle. The silence was broken only by the clash of their boots on the stones. The Germans here were caught off guard. The front ranks scaled the seawall and penetrated the town. Then the shooting began. One objective was the West Headland. The company attacking it was led by Major Claude Orme.
And I proceeded up and eventually arrived at our objective, and so I thought that was about time to send the code word, sorry, which meant that we had achieved our objective. I discovered later on that apart from the Lord Lovett's signal, presumably he sent sorry somewhere along the way, it was the only success signal sent to the headquarters ship during the operation.
Allied squadrons were already on their way over, heading for an attack on Dieppe.
In the meantime, the hurricanes, I believe they were, came over. That was very scary because they were low down and it just shook everybody.
I think the only reason I was flying so low is I was scared stiff to fly any higher, if the truth be told.
It's funny, as I was going along there was a little French boy, and typical with these very, you know, those terribly short shorts they wear, and he had a beret on. Anyway, he was playing cowboys and Indians. What would happen was he'd get behind a building, and he'd put this beret of his on the end of a stick, and hold it out around the end of the building. And if anybody fired at it, he'd bring it back. But if he held it out and they didn't fire, he'd stick it on his head and then run along the road. He's having a great time.
The SSR didn't have so great a time at the bridge in the eastern part of town. By now, it was under heavy fire from machine guns and mortars on the heights. Yet it had to be crossed, or the Canadians would be pinned down in Pourville. Some managed to get over. Others found they could clamber underneath, on the girders supporting the bridge, out of sight of German marksmen.
That's how we got across the river, but nobody said to move on anywhere else, so we had many discussions, decided we'd better go back where we were before. So back we went, and again across through the girders and back onto the other side, and scurried into a spot that we had discovered, which was a house sitting somewhat on stilts with a lattice work partially around it. We could get in behind the lattice work, and since we couldn't see, we assumed nobody else could see us.
As we neared the bridge, I had heard that people had gone across underneath. And as we approached, I was preparing with the group, to make a toggle bridge, which was part of the thing we had learned in our training. At about this time, the colonel arrived on the scene and said, this wasn't fast enough. Could we go across the top?
Those who had made it to the other side were now in danger of being cut off. With the dead piling up under accurate and relentless fire, the attack began to lose its impetus. There was stalemate, confusion, when the colonel of the SSR, Cecil Merritt, took command of this critical situation.
When Colonel Merritt saw us stop, he looked across and he said, what's the matter with you fellows? You're not frightened, are you? And he said, without waiting for an answer, he said, Lefty, come out here, come here. So I walked out in the middle of the road with great trepidation, I would say. And he put his right hand on my shoulder, swung his helmet in his forefinger in his left hand and said, you see, there's no fire out here.
With Colonel Merritt urging them on, the men of the SSR made their move. But it was too late.
Bluntly, I thought it was stupid. I would much prefer to have gone under where it was safer. Because at this particular stage, they were already dead on the bridge. I could see no point in going over it.
There was no sense to go across the bridge. Other than the colonel was calling for us to go, and as privates, we certainly should have gone. But it just didn't. We just didn't have the enthusiasm to go. And we had been over the Fool Bridge twice, or under it, and back again, and there wasn't anything on the other side to do. For us, at least. So that was where we stopped.
The SSR attack fell short of its objective towards Dieppe, but the colonel was awarded the Victoria Cross.
Well, I think Merritt richly deserved his VC, but what he did deserve it for wasn't only the bridge. He visited every bloody soldier of our regiment seen him that day, eh? And that took some guts. Now, goddamn right it did.
There were many brave men at Dieppe that day. Lord Lovett's No. 4 commandos owed their success to their battle experience and to their leader's insistence on one point. He meticulously planned his own attack. Captain Pat Porteous went with him and won the Victoria Cross. Lord Lovett's force included 5 U.S. Rangers. Alex Sezima was one of the first Americans to set foot on German-occupied territory. And before they sailed for Dieppe,
Mountbatten came aboard the Prince Albert, the assault ship, and spoke to everyone. And he's an inspiring speaker at times like this. He said all the right things.
He said, tomorrow we deal the Hun a bloody blow. We expect 60% casualties, and those of you that will die tomorrow, may God have mercy on your souls.
And as he was moving off, he said, this is going to be a rough party. And I said, yes, that's what we had in mind.
It started here at 0450.
The bulk of the fire was coming from machine guns to the left of the beach. There was a considerable amount of tracer being fired from the slope to my left, and further back there was a stonk of 4-inch enemy mortars. And certain chosen men who were wearing leather jerkins went forward to the wire, which was on top of the shingle here in front of me. Now, the wire was about 6 foot high and fully 8 feet deep. And the men in leather jerkins literally charged into it like a herd of rogue elephants and rolled about and tried to flatten it, which they did, concertina wire, with considerable effect.
The commandos ran over their comrades and on up the beach.
I came up the shingle and started climbing over the wire. When I jumped down the other side, it was quite a bit of a drop, and I had a couple of grenades in each pocket, and that proved too much for my braces, which gave way. And so I had slight problems in keeping my trousers up for the rest of the operation.
The commando's objective was a shore battery to the west of Pourville. Lord Lovett took one party up a river valley to attack the guns from the rear. A second group landed at the foot of high cliffs. They pushed inland through this cleft, which was jammed with wire and heavily mined. They were led by Derek Mills Roberts.
And suddenly the battery fired. And looking back, I saw the ships coming in. Well, they were early, according to the orders I'd received, and we'd hoped to be up in front of the battery in our fire position before before anything happened. As it was, we had to cut our checking of the houses short.
He kept saying, go on, get on, you've got to get on fast. I said, well, I'm only doing what you tell me. Do you want me to run right up to the top, just like that, which we could do, and only too glad to do it, because house clearing is a beastly job. Pulled out, whoever would, very quickly indeed.
A bramble. And when we got to it, we suddenly came up here, and there in front of us lay the battery, large as life. And then my runner, Corporal Smith, and I came along to this barn. Here's what's left of the barn. And taking one of our snipers, we ran up onto the first floor and settled him on a convenient table. And we could see the big guns in front, with all the gun crews there. In fact, in number 1 gun pit was a cook wearing his cook's hat. And it was a rather tense moment, a beautiful summer's day. I said to my sniper, kill the layer behind the number 1 gun. And then he got himself in a comfortable position, rather as they do it busily. And then after an awesome and lengthy process of time, he took the first pressure. The rifle cracked, and the layer fell into the gun pit. And tremendous surprise all round. And one thing that was at the time, Sergeant Major Dunning came up with his little 2-inch mortar.
First 2 fell into the battery area, and the third one landed right in the ammunition dump.
So now you've got to take advantage of a thing like that, and we directed all fire possible on that gun pit. And of course the gun was a write-off.
I dove under a carriage. The sniper took the hat off my head, put the hole through the stocking cap. Along with it, he had put a bullet through the troop sergeant major, killed the aide man that came to his aid by putting one through his head. By the time I had seeked cover in a manure pile, there were already 3 additional people on the ground. So this was no fooling around. And at that point, I would say I was afraid.
On the whole, we're getting away with far better than we expected. And we were trying to get Lovett on the air. And this battle went on, the ding-dong business. And then we heard he was close at hand.
We'd run, really, all the way until we'd wiped out the guns. All my people ran for the best part of 1.5 miles before we made the attack. And that's like playing a pretty rough game of football when you go into an attack with bayonets.
Then, very light, that meant that Lovett's men were charging from the other side.
Well, we got up to the end of this bank, and I saw the Lovett there. And he said, "Patch, you're 5 minutes late, get on with it." So we turned left, fixed bayonets, and I gave the order to charge the actual gun positions.
One troop of 60 men came in from here. The other came from straight behind. They attacked with fixed bayonets. The fight was short, furious, no quarter hour still given, and it was all over within 3 to 5 minutes.
I was hit in the thigh by a bullet just before we got to the first gun pit. And I threw a grenade into the gun pit, as there were still a few Germans in there, and then hobbled on to the next gun pit, which was the one which had been hit by the mortar bomb and in which all the cordite charges had exploded. It was a very grim sight, as the bodies had been completely dismembered.
And then in came the Messerschmitt, flying very low. And of course, this was an embarrassment as far as we were concerned. So instead of bolting, we got up on the thing and waved. And Lord Lovett, a tall figure, and he gave a very genial wave, and I remember the squadron leader waggled his wings and waved, and that was that. And that passed off quite nicely. It could have been awful.
It was a long carry back to the boat. They seemed one hell of a long way off, and before we were entirely clear, we were being shot at from the tops of these cliffs where we're sitting now. But we laid smoke screens, which had been practiced in training, and we got them wounded onto the boats and away in pretty quick time. And the boats themselves engaged the cliff tops here and kept the enemy's head down.
Because it's rather like a bank robbery, a commando raid. You get in all right, but it's getting out that's the tricky part.
Success for the commandos. And half an hour after they landed, the Canadian assault on the main beach. Gun batteries covering the beach from the west headland were to have been knocked out by the SSR, but they were unable to get that far. The east headland was also heavily armed. It was the main objective of the Royal Regiment of Canada, but they were stopped on the beach at Puy. So now, 2 infantry battalions and the Calgary tanks were heading into a fully defended landing, with the floating reserves still to be committed. This was a crucial moment. Aboard the Calpe, communications were breaking down. General Roberts wouldn't know for hours what was happening at Puy and Pourville. In front of Dieppe, landing craft plowed towards the beach, escorted by HMS Barclay, one of the 8 Hunt-class destroyers on the raid. One of her pom-pom gunners was leading seaman Lofty Haynes.
When the raid started, we proceeded after the 6 sweepers. The 6 sweepers went in line, then we went in with, I believe it was about 3 or 4 destroyers, and we was ahead of them. And the landing craft was behind us, and we took them in like a mother goose with little ones, you see.
Right away, you start developing a sense of fear. The fear of the unknown. What's going to happen? You don't know. You're like you want to get away from it. You want to hide. It's like a kid, you know, running away from a boogeyman at night.
The beachfront was so calm and it was absolutely serene. And our understanding was that it would be bombed. And I felt really bad about that. And I don't know that I can describe my feeling. I think it was like a sick feeling. Geez, we're really getting into something that we didn't plan on.
No one opened fire at the sweepers. They waited and waited.
But right at that time, the aircraft, fighter aircraft came in, and they did a beautiful job. It came right in front of us, almost on top of us.
Our Spitfires and light bombers had gone over and bombed them like anything. And it was all, the sky was all purple. And I always remember that purple sky where the bombs were exploding. And then after that, the world hit us.
Lieutenant Wilhelm Friedrich Schlie was near the chateau above the casino.
In front of my bunker, I met Captain Ulrich. Hurry, hurry, he said. The English are here. The English are here. I said, where are they? I don't see any. And he said, yes, look out to sea. And it was getting lighter, and I stared intently out to sea, and I saw the landing craft. The sea was covered with landing craft. And I said, are those really all English? And he said, of course, the English are here. The English are here.
The bullets was really like rain. As they hit the water, it was just like a rain in a storm. On a storm, when it hits the water, you know. It was really terrific.
The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the RHLI, scrambled ashore on the western half, codenamed White Beach. One of their first objectives was the casino, a strong point. For these young Canadians, the maelstrom of battle was a plunge into utter madness.
It's a smashing, roaring sound. It's a monstrous sound that assails your ears. The earth is shaking. And you suddenly realize that you're in hell.
Firing from artillery was tremendous, particularly off the left headland where there were caves. These caves were filled with artillery that pounded us to hell.
Too many were pinned down on the beach before they ever got to the seawall. To go any farther would take superhuman effort.
I was receiving messages of people being pinned down on the rocks, people being pinned down behind the wall, of terrible mortar fire coming over the wall, machine gun fire coming down on them, asking for air support to try to knock out the guns up on the hill.
I knew as an infantryman, I wouldn't have wanted to be in the place of those Canadians, lying on those damned stones, not only having the fire come at them, but with fragments of stone flying everywhere.
A vicious air battle was now underway, 25 miles across and almost 5 miles high.
Die Engländer hatten eine sehr starke Luftabwehr über Dieppe, und zwar waren ständig ca. 100 Spitfire über Dieppe.
There were about 100 Spitfires over Dieppe, and we had to pierce the air umbrella that was protecting the landing. It was a tough assignment. In the whole battle, it was quite indecisive as to who had supremacy in the air.
A Norwegian sergeant pilot was flying a Spitfire, Per Bergfland.
I saw a Fokker 190 and I attacked, went down on him, and he disappeared behind the cloud. So I went also behind the cloud, and we were going around the cloud 3 times, but then I suddenly thought, I mustn't use up my fuel. So I turned around 180 degrees, and then when we met each other again, it was head on, and we were both firing, and we passed each other about, must have been about 3 feet. So quite close. But just afterwards, oil was flowing over my windscreen, so I couldn't see a thing. So I had to bail out. But then a German naval vessel came by and picked me up. The captain came down from the bridge, and he said to me, "Come and submit." That is, come with me. So we went up to his cabin, and he said, "Setzen Sie sich." That means, sit down. So I sat down, and then he looked at me and said, "Was wünschen Sie? What do you want? Cognac or liqueur?" So we both laughed, and we had a very nice talk, about 25 minutes. And then he suddenly said, "I'm sorry, I have to leave you because your friends are now attacking the ship."
Aboard the destroyer Barclay, the guns were kept just as busy.
We had orders to fire everything that come below the smoke screen. Anything, what happened? Anyway, we was banging away at the beach, and all of a sudden I spotted a plane coming through the smoke screen straight for us. And I hit it, blew it in smithereens, and it went straight in the water, straight in front of us. About 10 yards from the ship it landed, straight in the water. And all I see was brown water churned up. It's gone. That was one of our Spitfires. And was I sorry? Was I sorry? I just couldn't help it.
Meanwhile, in front of Dieppe, the RHLI made a gallant attack on the casino.
We just crawled along the seawall to the casino. When we got inside the casino, it was a shambles. There were dead Germans. There were some of our people wounded and dead. There were some Germans that had already been captured and tied up.
There were Germans upstairs. There were Germans in some of the wings. And we proceeded to try and root them out, which we eventually did.
All this time, landing craft had been bringing in the Calgary tanks along the whole stretch of beach at Dieppe. Wave after wave, leaving the boat pool a few kilometers offshore and heading in to face the hail of fire from the cliffs. They then found themselves on a beach that was very different from the ones where they had rehearsed 2 months before.
Als wir die landen sahen,
Da kriegten wir natürlich doch einen ziemlichen Schreck, denn das waren ja große
When we saw them land, we were really frightened. They were so big and with so many of them. We thought, this will be dangerous.
Das wird doch sehr gefährlich, haben wir geglaubt. Und einige Panzer fuhren
Some of the tanks managed to get up on the promenade.
Und nach einiger
But after a while, we saw that they couldn't really do much.
Uns nicht viel tun konnten.
I told my driver to advance, and we started up. And I realized that this seawall was, 6 feet or more instead of what was supposed to have been 2.5 feet, and that we were hitting round pebble gravel about that size instead of what we'd been told was a sandy beach.
And the other thing was a surprise was an anti-tank ditch that had been dug along the seaward side of the seawall. We didn't know that was there.
We were anticipating what we'd had in England. I was absolutely astounded when I saw this stuff. And, here we have, look at the size of this.
I broke my track, and then, of course, we started to look for targets. And then I became aware that there was a blockhouse built into the side of the casino. And so we decided we'd concentrate on that to try to either by concussion or by knocking off with our anti-tank gun, see if we could break down that concrete. But there was no way. Our shells were just bouncing off the concrete. It was useless. And then I found Jack Dunlap where he was.
I radioed back and told him that I was behind the casino, and maybe if I could get around behind it, I could hit it.
And he did. He found them, and strange as it may seem, he found the back door open. Between himself and his sergeant, they cleaned it up.
Marcel Lambert on the left and Jack Dunlap. A later landing brought Ed Bennett and in his tank, Archie Anderson.
As we approached the beach coming in on the landing craft, Mr. Bennett could see that the situation wasn't as the book had stated. There was smoke along the beach, and the seawall looked different than we had seen it on the aerial photographs. So he suggested that we should get up on the tank and have a good look at the beach and the approaches from out at sea, so we could make some sort of plan as to where to go when we landed.
I was standing on the back of my tank, just behind the turret, when there was a terrific explosion.
And this explosion swathed Mr. Bennett in a sheet of flame.
I reached up, my hair seemed to be crisp, and my face was burned.
And also he had blood issuing from both eyes and losing a lot of blood from a slash on the side of his throat. And if I remember right, he said, "Can you take it in?" And I swallowed a very large lump and said, "Yes, sir, I think so." Then he said, "Never mind, I can go myself."
And then just had time to get back into the tank and climbed in, and off we went.
As we left the PLC, there was a circle of wounded men on the beach, and they were all gathered in a circle as though they were trying to help each other and doing what they could for themselves. There was one man in particular who had the main muscle on his upper leg cut, so that the muscles had separated and curled back, and he was desperately trying to push the muscles back into position, as though he was embarrassed at being caught in such a situation. And then, like a film break, a shell landed among them, and when the flash disappeared, so had they. They had completely disappeared. I think I would have to say at that point I felt sheer terror.
By now, Ed Bennett was in great pain and could barely see. But his was one of the few tanks to get across the beach, over the promenade, and onto the boulevard that runs along the front. He traveled its entire length, but there was no way into town. Every street running in from the boulevard had a tank barrier, solid concrete, and the engineers meant to demolish them had all been killed. The fortress was secure. The Essex Scottish got only a dozen men right into Dieppe, led by Company Sergeant Major Cornelius Stapleton. But the command ship offshore, HMS Calpe, got a garbled report of their numbers, so General Roberts believed he had a whole battalion in the town and sent in his reserves, including the FMR, led by Colonel Menard. Lieutenant Daniel Doney went with them.
We left Calpe and we went back through Smoke Screen to join the flotilla of our boats, which contained the battalion, the FMRs. And Menard went to the back of the ML and picked up one of these loud hailers and addressed his battalion, sort of like a pep talk to the FMR battalion. They were going back to France. The honor of French Canada was at stake, and he expected every man to do his duty. It was sort of a combination of Nelson and Shakespeare, of once again, dear friends, into the jaws we go.
Smoke screen was laid by the Air Force, and that smoke screen was blown towards the city, and we got into the smoke screen. Naval people who were in charge of the craft lost their point of reference. They didn't know where we were. So some of the troops landed way off on the right under the cliffs. They became useless. Some were out on the left, the wrong place. They became almost useless. And the remainder landed in the middle. I jumped off, and the water may be knee-high, with Captain Leroux and a signals operator. I spoke to Leroux, no answer. I turned around, he'd been shot. So I walked on the beach and I saw these soldiers lying on the ground, you know, with their heads pointing towards the wall. They all seemed to be lined up as if they were getting ready for something. So I waited for them to do something, to move or do something. But they didn't move. So I crawled over to one of them, turned him over, spoke to him. He was dead. I checked with a few more, they were all dead. So that shook me.
Menard was beside me, and then the next thing I knew, he'd been hit and was gone.
It's quite normal to be hit once. But when you're hit twice, you feel quite safe, because this is abnormal to be hit twice. So after I'd been hit twice, I said, well, at least I'm scot-free now. But I got hit the third time, and that never happened. So I started to blame, you know, the teachers who had taught me years before the statistics of casualties. And I started to get a bit mad at them. But then when I was hit the fourth time, I really decided the book should be thrown away because there was nothing good on it. Then by the time I was hit the fifth time, I didn't believe much in anything.
Then the rest of the reserves arrived, the Royal Marines.
It was really a suicidal approach to the beach because they were under very, very heavy fire. And somebody in one of the lead boats, I believe, of course, was Colonel Phillips, I think his name was, stood up in the boat with his back to the beach and waved part of his flotilla back, and he was killed.
So I told my wireless operator, call General Roberts and pass him a message on these lines, you know, situation bad on Central Beach or something like that. And I said, no, make sure you've got it right, repeat. And he didn't repeat, so I turned around, there he was, dead. So I had no communication.
Aboard the Calpe, General Roberts finally began to read reports of disaster.
He gave me the impression that he wanted to do more. He appreciated that things were not going too well on the beach, as we knew by this time now, with the reports that were coming back. I heard him use the expression that they were all his boys. And the man was very, very emotional at this time. Most of the landing craft that were bringing off casualties from the beach, the first waves of casualties from the beach, were making for us. We were the only ship stopped, the only ship they could get alongside. So we put the scrambling nets down, and the pressure started to come when we can see the amount of the casualties.
I'd never seen so many or such serious casualties before. There was a great deal of blood, and the gangways of the ship towards the end of the operation were literally filled with bodies in various stages of injury and disablement.
At Pourville, a U.S. Ranger saw the prairie regiments try to reach their landing craft.
Canadian soldiers up and down the beach were making a run for the water line. I remember seeing some getting hit. They would roll and tumble in the sand. I remember seeing bodies at the water's edge rolling back and forth with the surf. You could tell where craft had come in because there were groups or numbers of bodies at a given point, and you could tell this is where a craft had loaded.
You know, we were in the water, and so many people were being shot. The mortar bombs, and the Germans had moved right in on right up close, and we were just sitting ducks, and yes, you actually could smell that sweet smell of the blood.
I got into the boat, tried to assist with the wounded because it was very bad. Situation was bad. We had got out a couple of 1,000 yards, and due to the fact that I'm not sure whether the Navy chap that was running it had problems up at the front end, but they couldn't close the doors. Consequence, she's taking in water quite heavy. We try to get the people that weren't too wounded to get out and sort of just hang on the side, but panic is an awful thing. And she just turned over.
The assistant beach master, and I recall his name was Dave Price, came up from the edge of the water, his left arm hanging loose with blood running down.
He turned and he spit, and he says, no one could have told me that the Royal Navy didn't have the guts.
So that's the last boat. I said, what do you mean that's the last boat? He says, I mean just what I say. That's the last boat. I said, what are we going to do? And I remember he just shrugged his shoulders and looked at me.
Regiments that had trained for 3 years were suddenly disorganized, decimated. Units that had started the day full of confidence were demoralized. Then, on the main beach at the casino.
This man went berserk. He just went completely out of his mind. Too many of his buddies were killed, and he saw the Germans there, and he just simply started to bayonet them. He just the bayonet through them 3 or 4 times through each one. He killed 3, and before I got to him, and I wrenched the rifle away from him, and I had to yell in his ear to get him to even understand what was happening. Then I said, well, let's get the hell out of here. And just after we passed the end of the casino, he was shot down. And I went on then to the beach.
Then Con Stapleton made it back from the town.
Dived over the wall, literally, into a hole. And with the tremendous shock, everyone I saw was wounded. Everyone I saw was bleeding. And I thought, well, is this the situation on the beach?
The tank had been totally wasted on the beach at Dieppe.
We scrambled down from the turret into the driver compartment, and came out through the side hatch like a bunch of gophers, more or less, out on our hands and knees onto the beach. And then we proceeded to go down to an abandoned landing craft. And Mr. Bennett, by this time, had his eyes sealed completely shut.
While we were there, Archie said to me that they were bringing some assault boats in to take us off. And I simply said, Archie, we'll take the second flight. And it was probably the best decision that I made in the entire day.
We got to the beach. Because of the fire, I didn't lower a kedge anchor, and we put the doors down.
There was a mad rush for the boats. There were far too many men for the boats. The boats went under with the weights of the bodies. The mortar bombs were falling amidst them, and it was just chaos.
They literally threw themselves into the water. They came over the door, they came over the side of the boat. And as the boat was rocking, these dead bodies were coming into the boat. They were shot coming through the door.
The boat had been hit and it was sinking slowly. There was no hope. Those people were screaming. They knew that was the end of their life.
I looked up and I thought, I'm not going to make it. There's no way I can even raise my arm again to make another stroke. And I put my face in the water, and I thought, dying isn't so bad, really.
The surrender had begun. The fighting petered out.
The first time I saw a German officer, or a German, was one that was within about 25 yards of the tank with the machine gun, and he just waved us off the beach. And you just walk up with your hands in the air, and that was it. You just surrendered.
I think probably the first reaction to becoming a prisoner of war is a sense of humiliation and a sense of futility as well, in that we didn't know what our treatment would be, whether it would have really been worthwhile to carry wounded, because we didn't know what their treatment would be.
We ran out of ammunition about, I suppose an hour before the white flag went up. And nobody in my tank had been hurt. We had 4 people and myself there. So we opened the escape hatch towards the sea, because all the fire was coming the other way, and we were pretty well broadside with the water. So I said to Tom Pinder, I said, why don't we fire up the old primus stove? And we did, and with that he put on a couple of cans of pork and beans, and we had some bread and margarine, and we sat there and ate those till the Germans came over to our tank after the flag went up.
What especially impressed me was a Canadian, or an Englishman, I don't know which, sitting in an armored scout car, burned to the bone. His gleaming bones sat there in the scout car as if he wanted to drive on further. It was not a pretty picture. It really wasn't.
Dead on the beach. I've never seen such obscenities before. There were pieces of human beings littering the beach. There were headless bodies, there were legs, there were arms. And they were blackened. And they looked inhuman. I remember I felt very sick when I saw these sights. And I had no shoes, and there were shoes lying around, but there were feet in them and that sort of thing.
The Navy suffered over 500 casualties and lost 34 vessels, mostly landing craft sunk or stranded on the beaches. This downed flyer was rescued. 66 others were not. The Allies lost 106 planes, making it one of their worst days in World War II. They claimed 170 German planes destroyed or damaged. The truth, 48 shot down, 24 damaged, less than half the Allied losses. Over 1,000 Canadians never even made it to the beaches. Only 1,000 of the Canadians who actually landed got back that day. Over 600 of them wounded.
When I was in the hospital, of course, I had a few visitors, among which was the unit chaplain. And he didn't look good. I said, how do you feel? He said, I feel bad. Then we talked about those who didn't come back. He said, Colonel, when I got back to the unit's lines and I saw all these tents with flaps open, pair of boots, you know, out in the sun, a letter half written on a table, a bed unmade, you know, buttons, the new uniform, you know, to be sewn, still on the bed. He said, and I knew these people would never come back, and I cried like a baby. And I cried too.
Well, here I am back at the peace and quiet of Dieppe. I've just come back from that great raid on Dieppe. It was the first attack in which American troops have participated during this war. And I can say, after watching our men in action, fighting their way across the Channel and fighting their way up the cliffs of Normandy, that they're going to give a grand account of themselves when the time comes for further great movements on the European continent.
Eventually, the public learned what really happened at Dieppe. German casualties, less than 600. Allied casualties, almost 4,000. The Canadians were hardest hit. Among those killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, 336 of the SSR, 338 of the Cameron Highlanders, 174 of the Calgary Tanks, 474 of the RHLI, 528 of the Essex Scottish, 511 of the FMR, and here at Puy, 522 of the Royal Regiment of Canada. The greatest shame at Dieppe was the battle plan itself.
Well, the operation as a whole, I think, should never have been attempted. Our own particular part in it in Corps Commander, that did go like clockwork, and we achieved our objectives with very few casualties. But looking at Dieppe, certainly now and at other times when I visited it in peacetime, to see the positions on the, well, to see the beaches and the way they were covered by, obviously covered by machine gun fire from the cliffs on either side of the harbor, they were a complete death trap.
We were just pinned down. We couldn't walk back. We couldn't get forward. We couldn't go on the side. So we were dead, really, before dying. We were condemned. Better trained troops, which would have been very hard to find, by the way. Any other troops could not have done better.
If, as they say, the Dieppe Raid saved a lot of lives on D-Day, fine. I think most of the boys would agree it was okay. But if it was just an action to prove something or to satisfy some other political power, this is wrong.
Well, the total lesson learned from the Dieppe was unquestionably that you cannot, in fact, capture a port by a frontal assault without having such heavy bombardment and bombing as to destroy the port facilities for which we were trying to capture the port.
people excused Dieppe by saying, well, we learned by our mistakes. But we didn't need to make the mistakes that we made at Dieppe. I mean, surely they should have had a better concept of the kind of a plan that they should have without having to have the Dieppe disaster.
They didn't have the experience of an operation that size. Nobody had any experience. So errors were committed and were to be expected, except it was a costly error.
It was useless. It was something that was unnecessary, and I don't feel that the sacrifice of my sacrifice and the sacrifice of the men that were killed accomplished anything.
And, well, we all want to be friends in this world now, but what was it worth? What was it all about?
To reveling in the misery of all the casualties of the prisoners of war and the thinking it was a failure. It wasn't a failure. Without Dieppe, we couldn't possibly have had the invasion. Without the invasion, we couldn't possibly have won the war. Where would we be now? Think of the millions of people who have been murdered. Well, aren't they proud? They should be proud. They behaved with an example of courage, did everything they could possibly be called upon them to do. They did. We learned lessons which I know they don't believe we learned, but I can tell you I was the chap who learned them. To try and make them feel it's a thoroughly good show, and that the young children should be proud of their fathers being the heroes of Dieppe.
To do something to answer demands from Stalin and Roosevelt for a second front. To learn how not to mount an invasion. These were the young men called upon to pay the price.